Welcome into the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, August 5th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 4 days away from their first preseason game against the Houston Texans on Friday night at Acrisure Stadium. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to take you through some of my observations from a day down at St. Vincent College for Steelers training camp and some of the biggest questions about the Steelers heading into the season. And of course, if we're talking the biggest questions, we got to start with the quarterbacks. And that's where we'll go. Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. What are we seeing from these guys? And who's going to be the starter in week one? It still looks like it's going to be Russell Wilson. Mike Tomlin has not changed his tune on the pole position. And I can't imagine that he will. Even if Fields is great in the preseason, and even if Fields continues to get all of the first team reps in training camp, because that's the case right now. Fields is getting more snaps than Russell Wilson because Russell Wilson is still nursing his calf injury. And Justin Fields is looking pretty good. He looked pretty good there on Saturday. The reports from before that, talking with Brian Batko last week, are that Fields looks decent. He also shows some of the flaws that are the big reasons that Chicago moved on from him. But there's a functional quarterback there. And we don't know if that's the case with Russell Wilson because we just haven't really seen it, at least not in a significant number of reps. So the day I was there on Saturday, it was more of a low-key practice after Friday Night Lights on Friday, and we all have gotten reports and read on Twitter about, some chippiness, some competitiveness, and a team that looks like it's coming together and looks like it could be competitive in the AFC North, but really the big question is who's going to be under center. And with Fields in 7 shots on Saturday, on the very first play, he held onto the ball too long and took a coverage sack. That's a big problem with Justin Fields that we knew about when the Steelers traded for Justin Fields. And it doesn't appear to be going away. That was kind of a theme throughout the day. On Saturday was Fields holding onto the ball. And that's just how he plays. It's not something abnormal for Justin Fields to hold onto the ball because he's so dynamic with his legs that he has a belief that if he can't find somebody really open, he'll go get the first down or 7 yards or 8 yards or 30 yards with his legs because he can do that. And he's done that for so long. And really, he did that in the NFL with Chicago with a lot of success. But for this offense to work, for an NFL offense to function, you need your quarterback to be on time, to be willing to let go of the football. And later in practice, we saw that. The highlight from Justin Fields was in 11-on-11s. Fields had a clear running lane. The C's kind of parted on the offensive line, and he could have taken off. Instead, he floated a pass towards the left sideline to Van Jefferson, who was running a corner route right over the outstretched arms of the defensive back. Van Jefferson reeled it in. It was Fields' best throw of the day. It was a really nice play, a good catch from Jefferson, but a perfect throw. And more than just it being a good throw, because we know Fields is a quality passer, it's that he was willing to throw it instead of using his legs. That was a reason for some optimism. In the 7-on-7 portion, Fields was actually getting the ball out pretty quick, especially on some out-breaking routes to George Pickens, and Russell Wilson got in the mix there, and Wilson looked okay. Fields looked okay. Some goal line stuff, 7-on-7. There's not a ton to take away from it, but I like that Fields was getting the ball out of his hands quickly in rhythm because if you're drawing something up to a George Pickens in the red zone, you got to hit it. You got to trust it. You got to see it, hit it, and trust it. And Fields was doing that. Now, the worst play from Justin Fields on Saturday is actually a really good sign for the Steelers defense. It came during the 11-on-11 portion. Fields was in the shotgun, running back flanked to his right. This play has been on Twitter. Running back on a little swing route out to the right. Fields looks to throw it right away. Clearly, it's designed to just get the ball out of his hands, get it to your running back, and let him play in space. Beanie Bishop coming off the edge kind of stunts out, takes away the first passing lane, and the offensive tackle moves with him. Fields pumps, holds it, and then Bishop jumps back. Fields throws it again in the now open lane, or what looked like an open lane. Bishop picks it, pick six. It was really impressive from Beanie Bishop. And if I had to bet right now, he's your starting nickel corner in week 1. And there's not a huge question about it. He just looks better than everyone else. That's what the reports have been all offseason, and that's what I saw, clearly. Undrafted free agent out of West Virginia. He can play. And the coaching staff loves him. More than just I like him or the beat reporters have seen some promise for him. The coaching staff loves Beanie Bishop. That was my biggest takeaway from being at training camp instead of just seeing clips. Terrell Austin yelling about him and his defensive backs coach yelling Beanie constantly throughout practice in a positive way. They love the guy. They love the effort he brings. In one-on-one drills, Beanie was doing a great job. It's one-on-one tackling drills with no pads, not even tackling, just positioning essentially. But Beanie was doing a great job not getting beat by the receivers, to the point that Mike Tomlin called him to the front of the line to go against Calvin Austin, who was pretty much untouchable and is all obviously going to be in a one-on-one with some space towards the sideline. How are you going to get your hands on Calvin Austin? That's a tough thing to do. Beanie Bishop wasn't able to. They went twice. Mike Tomlin called them back to go twice, and it looked like Austin beat him both times. Bishop didn't get beat by a lot. He was competitive, but it was a really promising sign that Tomlin is putting him in that challenging position, because there were a few times throughout that drill that Tomlin was organizing matchups that he wanted to see. And he wanted to see Beanie against Calvin Austin, who in that setting, Calvin Austin's the best the Steelers have. And Beanie, while he probably lost both reps, acquitted himself pretty well. And it looks like he's going to be your slot corner in week 1. And judging from how Cam Sutton played last year in Detroit, in week 9, when Sutton's back from his 8-week suspension, or week 10 after the bye week, I wouldn't be surprised if Beanie holds on to that job. Obviously, we'll have 8 games of a sample size with Beanie, and who knows health and whatnot. There's so many factors. But he looks like a real player, and that's a huge boost for the Steelers defense that didn't have an answer in the slot coming into training camp or coming into the offseason until Beanie Bishop started to really impress the reporters, the coaching staff, everyone. So that's a good sign for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and maybe an answer to a burning question, not just another question that we have coming out of training camp. And there's no question that if you're listening to this, you love the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, hey, Steelers fans, if you like this podcast, you enjoy listening to me or Tommy and Shane on Wednesdays, then be sure to like and subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We really appreciate the support. And with that, we'll get to our third burning question. It's wide receiver 2. Do the Steelers have one? And to me, the better question is, do the Steelers really need one? Now, it looks like the competition's coming down to Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin, especially with Roman Wilson's injury. And I like Roman Wilson as a prospect, but losing 2 weeks plus of training camp your rookie year pretty much knocks you out of contention as like a true wide receiver 2, unless you're a bona fide first-round pick, and Wilson's not. He's a third-rounder. I think he can get into the mix later in the season, but he probably is not going to be in contention to be wide receiver 2, and that's okay, because Van Jefferson looks pretty good. That was another one of my takeaways from seeing it live and in person. He looks like a professional, and the coaching staff treats him like a professional, like a veteran wide receiver. He's not really being put in a position to prove himself. But in the opportunities that he has, he's looked great. In training camp, he hasn't looked like he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. And what I mean by he hasn't been put in the position to prove himself is that it seems like this coaching staff thinks he doesn't have to prove himself, that he has a spot on this roster. He has a spot primarily as wide receiver 2. And I think it was Tommy Jaga on the Wednesday show when they were going through their positional breakdown. He compared Van Jefferson to similar to what the Steelers had in Allen Robinson, where he's kind of a slot, can kind of play outside, but isn't really a plus in either spot. I think Van Jefferson at this point is probably like washed up Allen Robinson plus, in that he can do both of those things. He's not quite as good as Allen Robinson was in his heyday in Jacksonville or even Chicago, but he's better than the Allen Robinson that the Steelers had. I think he'll be a serviceable wide receiver. And really, my point is that's all the Steelers need at wide receiver 2, because looking at this offense through walkthroughs, 11-on-11 drills, and what we're hearing about the reports, we'll see even more of this Arthur Smith offense in the preseason. I think wide receiver 2 is probably the 5th most important skill position player on Arthur Smith's offense. Obviously, wide receiver 1, and then probably running back 1 and 2, and then tight end 1, and then wide receiver 2. In some cases, in some teams that he's had last year in Atlanta, for example, you would even put tight end 2 above wide receiver 2. Now, some of that's personnel dependent, but the Steelers have the personnel that dictates wide receiver 2 is not that important. And Arthur Smith's offense have always siloed targets to their primary wide receiver. We've talked about this all offseason. That will be the case with George Pickens. And this running game is going to be very important. But beyond that, there was a lot of screen game for the Steelers that I noticed, certainly more than the Matt Canada era. Getting the ball in the hands of Jaylen Warren, getting the ball in the hands of Naji Harris, and even wide receivers like Calvin Austin, who I was very impressed with. And while I'm saying Van Jefferson probably has the leg up to be wide receiver 2, I believe it's possible that Calvin Austin could actually be more involved in the offense, just in less snaps, coming in either in the slot or outside and getting a screen drawn up for him, or a jet sweep is kind of a forbidden word as we're all healing from the Matt Canada years, but some type of a pop pass, just getting the ball into his hands, because he looks really dynamic. He looks healthy. He's still a young, pretty unproven player who's dealt with some injuries over his first 2 seasons. He looks healthy. He looks dynamic. I think the Steelers will find ways to get the ball into his hands. But there's no space in this offense, especially if Justin Fields is the quarterback, where the quarterback run game is then a factor. There's no space in this offense for 2 high-quality, borderline elite or elite wide receivers. And there are reports coming out today all morning that Brandon Ayuk, the trade market, is finally heating up, and San Francisco finally seems motivated to actually get something done. Maybe they've seen something they've liked from Ricky Pearsall, their first-round pick. Maybe they're just tired of Ayuk and his hold-in. Either way, the reports say that the Steelers are still in the mix, in quotations. But I don't think they're a real contender, and I don't think they should be. And I've maintained that all offseason, because I don't see this offense having space for 2 wide receivers. And if you don't have a franchise quarterback that you can believe in to win you a Super Bowl, then why don't you see what George Pickens has as wide receiver 1? If he can make it through this whole season as like the true target and be a 1,500-yard receiver, okay, then you have something. Then you go pay him a big extension, and you got your wide receiver in the Arthur Smith offense that you need. I just don't think trading for Ayuk makes any sense. I definitely don't think it's going to happen. And what I saw at training camp only confirmed that for me, that this offense is not going to rely heavily on multiple receivers to make it go. Instead, it'll probably be multiple running backs. And that brings us to our next question. Does Naji Harris even fit in this Arthur Smith scheme? Because I'm not certain that he does. Harris is a bigger physical running back. We know this. He thrives between the tackles. In short yardage, I actually think that's where Naji is best. And that's why his yards per carry numbers are sometimes uglier because they're in obvious running situations. And a lot of times he makes the most of them. That's, I think, his best ability. But I also think he's been the second best running back on this team for 2 years. And I'm not sure that this system's going to be right for him. Now, Arthur Smith's offense is one of the staples of it is the outside zone run game. He's not a true like Shanahan disciple. We know those guys, Shanahan, McVay. McVay is kind of actually transitioning to a more power running game with guys like Kevin Dotson, who he and the Rams traded for. That's more because of inefficiencies in the NFL market, just kind of how it works. Teams have prioritized getting faster, lighter linebackers to cover sideline to sideline. Okay, McVay has realized this, and he'll run it right down your throat at you, at your 225-pound linebacker who can't hold up against a pulling guard. So the Rams have kind of changed that. But regardless, Arthur Smith still believes in the outside zone and stretch running game to move linebackers and bootleg off of it. It's not a true Shanahan disciple offense because it's not exactly like that, but it has those principles. And the Steelers have the athletic offensive line for that. But I don't know that Najee Harris is the right fit for it. Jaylen Warren looked great in the reps I saw, and Jaylen Warren always looks great every time he touches the ball. I'm the biggest Jaylen Warren fan. I think he's fantastic. I think he should be running back one. Najee, I'm not so sure about. When he was asked about the team's reasoning for not picking up his fifth-year option, he told reporters that, quote, they didn't know where the offense was headed, end quote. Najee later went on to highlight his mindset around the situation and his positive mindset around the situation. That's good. That's a good sign. Najee Harris could have come into this training camp being a problem. It seems like he hasn't been. It seems like he has a good mindset heading into this season. That's great. But that may not remain the case if this offense doesn't work for him. So Najee Harris, between the tackles in 2023, 105 of his 267 carries came in the A gap, either to the left or right of the center. And he averaged 3.8 yards per attempt, left of center, 4.7 right of center. A pretty good between the tackle, even between the guards runner. On runs off the left tackle, though, so this is like kind of the outside zone stuff we're talking about, 18 carries, 3.1 yards per attempt. Off the left end, so that's with the tight end out there, 21 carries, 3.9 yards per attempt. Now, I don't think any running back could succeed running behind Dan Moore Jr. That's kind of an impossible task and a ridiculous thing to ask an NFL running back to do. And I'll get to Dan Moore Jr. next because I'm just so done with seeing him. But off the right tackle, which is a better situation, 7 carries, 3.6 yards per attempt. And off the right end, 32 carries, 3.4 yards per attempt. Not efficient numbers, especially when you juxtapose them with Jaylen Warren's production. So he's the perfect fit for this outside zone stuff. In the A gap, we'll look at the A gap stuff because I'll show you that Warren is still way more efficient. 5.1 yards per attempt left of the center and 4.8 right of the center. Still better. That's not the point. Off left tackle, 10 carries for Warren last year, 4 yards per attempt. Off left end with the tight end out there, 20 carries, 4.6 yards per attempt, and 6.7 yards per attempt off left guard compared to Najee at 4.2. So just way better production running to the left side. Off right tackle, 11 carries, 4.3 yards per attempt compared to Najee's 3.6. And off the right end, 7.3 yards per attempt compared to Najee's 3.4, and that's in 16 carries. Off the right guard, Najee's best number is 4.6 running behind the right guard last year. Warren was a yard better at 5.6. So he's better all over because he's a better player, but he's also a better fit for this offense. And I think Jaylen Warren should be getting 20 touches a game this year. And I think Najee Harris should be more of a situational power, short yardage runner. That's what he's best at. But forcing your former first-round pick into that role in his fourth year after multiple 1,000-yard seasons could be a difficult thing to do. I still think the Steelers should do it. And ultimately, I think they will, because I think Jaylen Warren's going to be so good this year in this offense that it's going to be impossible to keep him off the field. Though, everybody would have said that about Bijan Robinson when he was the number 8 overall pick in Atlanta, and Arthur Smith found ways to keep him off the field. So we'll see. But my observation is I don't think Naji Harris is going to be a fantastic fit in the Arthur Smith offense. My final burning question coming out of training camp, and I don't have an answer for this one, and it infuriates me to no end. What is Mike Tomlin doing with this offensive line? And why won't he just break up with Dan Moore? I don't even need to go into the numbers with Dan Moore Jr. He's just not an NFL left tackle. And he has no positional versatility. He's told the team that he can't play right tackle. He also can't play left tackle, but he didn't tell them that, so they keep letting him do it. And for some reason, and apologies for beating this topic again, because I know Tommy talked about it on Wednesday and got maybe even more fired up than I am right now, but it's the most important topic of training camp, because outside of the quarterback position, of course, because you've spent back-to-back first-round picks on offensive tackles, and you're not playing them where they're supposed to be played or playing them at all with the first team. Troy Fautanu is taking second-team reps. Broderick Jones, with the first team that has Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle, is over at right tackle. And then when Dan Moore Jr. comes off, Broderick Jones goes over to left tackle, and Fautanu comes in at right tackle. I'm okay with the idea of moving Fautanu to right tackle. He played left tackle at Washington, but with a left-handed quarterback, so he was kind of the strong side tackle. Sure, and he's athletic enough to do it. I think he'll be fantastic in the role. Put him there. Broderick Jones was a left tackle in college. He actually wasn't that great at right tackle last year. Let him get the reps, not Dan Moore Jr. If they had a solid veteran that you really trusted, okay, give your young tackles time to grow. They don't. So put them out there. Let them get some cohesion with the guards next to them. Let them learn their spot, because offensive tackles talk about this all the time, that it's not easy to switch positions. It's a whole different situation. Your hands are different. Everything is opposite. That's hard to do. Let Broderick Jones be your left tackle. Let Troy Fautanu be your right tackle, and get rid of Dan Moore Jr. I can't understand what's happening with the coaching staff and their infatuation with a former fourth-round pick who has shown almost nothing impressive other than being better than Chuks Okorafor. Congratulations. It blows my mind. And late in practice, like, there's actually problems arising because of this. Late in practice in the 11-on-11, there were back-to-back awful reps at right tackle by both guys. A Troy Fautanu false start. Broderick Jones then gets blown by Nick Herbig right off the snap, which Nick Herbig looks really good, for a tackle for loss on a run play to the right. Just let them play where they're going to play. I ultimately still believe that the week 1 offensive line will be Jones, Seumalo. I kind of think it'll be Herbig instead of Frazier, and that's what the reports seem to be, that Zach Frazier hasn't been great. Daniels, and then Fautanu. I think that's what it'll be. But I'm starting to lose faith in that notion, that there's a tendency among fan bases, among teams, among everyone in football, for a team that took an offensive lineman to just go, all right, we're set at that position for 10 years. This is going to be a serviceable, if not all-pro caliber player at the position. because you just don't know that much about them. And it's hard for the average person to have an opinion, frankly, other than like the drastics of Dan Moore Jr., very bad. And, I don't know, Seumalo was a huge upgrade at left guard last year. Those things are obvious. But within the margins, it's harder to do. And not many people spend the time on it in draft season. So you just assume 100% they're going to be a lock. That's not the case. Offensive tackles, offensive linemen, they bust. It does happen. So don't put them in a position to fail. Don't put Broderick Jones in a position where going into his second year, he's learning two positions at once. Just let him be a left tackle and let Fautonu play on the right. These are your guys. You invested in them. So invest in them in training camp. That's the end of my rant. And that takes us to just some miscellaneous thoughts about the training camp, the day of training camp I had and watching the team. I think that this is the first one. I tweeted this out because I couldn't wait. I was so excited. The Steelers upgraded massively from Presley Harvin with Cameron Johnston. Johnston has an absolute cannon, and he's consistent with it. Because Presley Harvin would boom a kick every once in a while, not nearly consistent enough. I think the Steelers actually have a legitimate weapon in the special teams with Cameron Johnston, and that's something that they haven't had for a really long time. They were way too loyal to Presley Harvin for kind of an unknown reason, just willing to continually run a failing, struggling punter out there week after week after week. That's not going to be the case anymore. They got a really good punter, and as important as that is, it's great news. It's not the most important upgrade you can make to a roster, but it was an easy one to make because obviously Presley Harvin was just not a good NFL punter. And Johnston is. That's exciting. That's a reason for optimism. Sometimes I'm a little pessimistic. I know I can skew that way. I'm really excited about the new punter. Speaking of special teams and punting and kickoffs, and we saw the new kickoff and the Hall of Fame game, and it is incredibly weird. Obviously we understand the rules and the theories behind it, that both teams line up 5 yards apart, and it limits head injuries and injuries of any kind during kickoffs because they're incredibly dangerous plays. And this also promotes more returns and safer returns and hopefully more excitement. It still just looks damn weird. And I don't think that's going to go away for a while. I don't think my brain's going to adjust to it for a really long time. It also fundamentally changes what the play is. And players have talked about this a lot. It's the idea of kick returning used to be a guy that sees a seam and goes. And then maybe you got to make somebody miss once or twice. Now it's more of a run play. So you want somebody bigger back there. Obviously Cordero Patterson is going to be the answer as the Steelers kick returner, but they're working different guys in. And one of the people that I am almost certain we'll see return either a kick or a punt is John Reese Plumlee, the fourth string camp arm quarterback that they brought in from UCF as an undrafted free agent. I'm not saying it'll be successful. I'm not saying it'll be a good return, but it seems like they're going to try him there. He continually takes reps with the returners, both punt and kick return reps. And he was a good running quarterback in a Gus Malzahn offense at UCF that relies heavily on the quarterback run game and quarterback athleticism. He's an undersized guy. He's listed at 6 foot. He's not 6 foot. He is noticeably shorter than Russell Wilson, or at least shorter and slighter than Wilson. If they're the same size, Wilson has much more of a presence to him, and that's been one of the reasons he's survived for so long. Not to get into Russell Wilson talk, one of the reasons he's survived so long as an NFL quarterback is he's got some weight to him to take some hits. John Reese Plumlee definitely doesn't have that. He's definitely not going to be an NFL quarterback at any point. He does not impress in that capacity. With the ball in his hands, though, he's kind of a shifty runner. Could be interesting. And with the kickoff now looking more like a run play, maybe he's somebody that could be comfortable looking at a wall of humanity and finding a hole, because that's kind of what a quarterback draw or a designed quarterback run is. That's something he's certainly familiar with. So we'll see it. I don't know how successful it'll be, but I would bet on seeing the fourth string quarterback return a punt or a kick at some point in the preseason. My next one is not a positive one, though I still think he'll be a functional player regardless of this. I'm not sure that Darnell Washington will ever be a useful part of the passing game. He just doesn't look comfortable running routes or catching passes, even in a training camp setting, even in just helmets, football with shorts type stuff. He, in his one opportunity, dropped a pass over the middle, and it was fairly contested, but a catch, or one of his two opportunities, a catch that an oversized tight end has to make to be a useful part of the passing game, right? They have to be that security blanket. Just throw it to Darnell and he can get you your 6 yards you need on third down. And he couldn't haul it in. And then later in the goal line work, 7-on-7s, Kyle Allen threw one across the field. It was like kind of a rollout right broken play situation, and just threw it up across the field to the other side. And Washington, against a corner, 6'7", 200-pound Darnell Washington against a corner, couldn't go up and get it over top of him. If he can't do that, if he can't do those two things, which those are just one example, but we didn't see it last year. He's never really looked comfortable in that role, even at Georgia. And if he can't do those two things, he's just never really going to be a functional part of the passing game. That still doesn't really matter if he's an elite blocking tight end, right? Mercedes Lewis has been in the NFL for a really long time because he's one of the best blocking tight ends in the NFL. And if you're an oversized tight end who can act as kind of a sixth offensive lineman, especially in an outside zone scheme like the Steelers have with Arthur Smith, where you kind of helping lead the way on that edge, you're a valuable player. And I think Darnell Washington will be a valuable player, just not really in the passing game. And then another former mid-round pick who has a lot of promise and kind of excitement, especially from his recruiting profile all the way back in high school and what he was in college at Texas A&M. DeMarvin Leal is better, but he's not necessarily going to be the answer as an interior defensive lineman. So I'm not sure it matters that much how much better he is. He's lining up mostly as like a run-stopping edge, which is a useful player, especially I talked about the Shanahan-ification of offenses across the NFL. Something that's useful against that is kind of an oversized edge when you want to do bare fronts and, 5-man defensive lines to limit the outside zone running and let your linebackers behind make plays. That's useful. It's less useful when you're on the same team as TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith and a very promising Nick Herbig and a team that just re-signed Marcus Golden. I think he's better. I think we'll see some good reps from him inside as maybe a pass rusher. Maybe that's ultimately his role, like occasional run-stopping edge and pass rushing interior defensive lineman. He looks like a better player. We saw some promise at the end of last season. I think he'll have a good preseason. And I don't know that that'll really move the needle for this defense in any meaningful way. And that brings us to the players to watch on Friday. We're getting to like real football that we can care about and watch. And that's super exciting. So here are some guys that I saw just to keep an eye out for. Jure Jenkins, second-year wide receiver from LSU, number 21. Played some special teams, has some nice burst. I think he'll get used in the passing game some in the preseason. And if he makes a couple plays, maybe he could move ahead of a Quez Watkins. I think he looked more impressive than Quez Watkins or Scotty Miller in the limited action that I saw, of course. just a guy with some burst to look out for. That's always a fun game in the preseason. Be like, who's going to be the preseason star? Maybe it'll be Jenkins. Jonathan Ward, 6-year running back from Central Michigan. Not a lot of promise there. He's been a pro for 5 years. He looked better than Dawan Edwards, the undrafted free agent running back from Georgia, and LaMichael Pirine. Sorry, struggled with both those names. LaMichael Pirine. He looked better than both of those guys. I don't really know what that means, right? There's no real opening on this roster at running back. But he looked better than them. I think he could look good in preseason. So look out for number 35. And then Julius Welshkoff, the 6'6", 265-pound rookie outside linebacker from Charlotte. Maybe he's a, interesting preseason edge rusher. Just somebody to look out for, right? I don't know what that means, but we're watching preseason games. I'm going to watch every snap of the preseason game. So I have guys that jumped out to me a little bit. He was kind of impressive athletic for his size. Could be something off the edge for a practice squad or something. And that's always fun, right? That's what this time of year is, except for teams like the Steelers that are still trying to figure out their quarterback situation. That's more what it is, but the preseason's fun to take a look at these young guys and see who's going to be your favorite member of the practice squad that will never really make an impact, but is a fun guy to root for. And those are my 3 guys to keep an eye out for on Friday. That's going to do it for the show. A bit of a short one this week. Next week, have a pretty exciting guest lined up. Excited to do that. And we'll actually have real football to talk about. So really excited for next Monday. Make sure you're back. Make sure you like, subscribe, everything, because we're, really excited for this football season here at Steel Curtain. I know I'm incredibly excited to see real live Steelers football on Friday, and I'm sure you are too. So until next Monday, go Steelers and have a good one.